Nazism, short for National Socialism, continues to cast a long shadow over human history. This totalitarian ideology, born in the aftermath of a devastating war, plunged the world into chaos and left an indelible mark on the 20th century. To understand the rise of Nazism, we must delve into the turbulent years following World War I, a period of profound economic, social, and political upheaval in Germany. At its core, Nazism was a toxic brew of extreme nationalism, virulent anti-Semitism, and a lust for power. It promised a return to a mythical German golden age, a time of strength and prosperity. This message resonated with a nation grappling with defeat, humiliation, and economic hardship. The Nazis exploited these grievances, skillfully manipulating public opinion and turning despair into a dangerous longing for a charismatic leader. The Nazis' ideology was rooted in racism and hatred, particularly targeting Jews, who were scapegoated for Germany's problems. They also promoted the idea of a master race, the Aryans, who they believed were destined to rule over inferior peoples. This poisonous mix of ideas would have devastating consequences for millions of people across Europe and beyond. Understanding how this hateful ideology took root and flourished is crucial to preventing its resurgence in any form. The year is 1919. The world is still reeling from the cataclysmic events of the Great War, a conflict that reshaped nations and altered the course of history. The guns have fallen silent on the Western Front, and the once thunderous battlefields now lie eerily quiet. But the echoes of war continue to reverberate across a shattered Europe, leaving behind a landscape scarred by destruction and loss. Germany, once a proud and powerful empire, lies defeated and demoralized. The Treaty of Versailles has imposed harsh penalties, stripping the nation of its territories and military might. The Great War, a conflict of unprecedented brutality and destruction, had left its mark on the German psyche. The soldiers who survived returned home, forever changed by the horrors they had witnessed. Millions lay dead on the battlefields, victims of modern warfare's terrible efficiency. The scale of the carnage was unimaginable, with entire generations lost to the trenches. The economic cost of the conflict was staggering. Germany's economy was in ruins, its currency devalued, and its industries crippled. Germany's infrastructure lay in ruins, its industries crippled, and its people facing starvation. The once thriving cities were now shadows of their former selves, with many struggling to find food and shelter. The once mighty German army, a symbol of national pride, returned home defeated and demoralized. Their dreams of victory turned to ashes. The soldiers, who had once marched with confidence, now walked with a heavy burden of defeat. The war had shattered not only Germany's physical landscape, but also its social fabric. Communities were torn apart, and the sense of national unity was fractured. Returning soldiers struggled to reintegrate into civilian life, haunted by the horrors they had witnessed. Many suffered from what we now know as post-traumatic stress disorder, finding it difficult to adjust to a world that had moved on without them. Families mourned the loss of loved ones, their grief compounded by economic hardship. Widows and orphans were left to fend for themselves in a society that was struggling to rebuild. The social order, once seemingly unshakable, began to crumble under the weight of defeat and despair. Protests and riots became common as people demanded change and sought answers to their suffering. In the years following the armistice, Germany was a nation adrift, searching for meaning amidst the ruins. The old certainties had been swept away, leaving a void that many struggled to fill. The old order had been swept away, but what would replace it? The Weimar Republic, born out of the ashes of the German Empire, faced immense challenges from the outset. This period of uncertainty and upheaval created fertile ground for extremist ideologies like Nazism to take root and flourish. The seeds of future conflict were sown in the fertile soil of despair and disillusionment. The Treaty of Versailles, signed in 1919, was meant to be the peace treaty to end all wars. It was the culmination of months of negotiations and discussions among the Allied powers, who sought to create a framework for lasting peace in Europe. Instead, it became a source of deep resentment and instability in post-war Europe. The treaty's terms were seen as excessively harsh and punitive by many, particularly in Germany. The treaty, drafted by the victorious Allied powers with little input from Germany, was seen by many Germans as a diktat, a humiliating and unjust punishment imposed on a defeated nation. The lack of German representation in the negotiations only deepened the sense of injustice. The treaty's terms were indeed harsh. Germany was forced to accept sole responsibility for the war, a clause that caused widespread outrage and indignation. This war guilt clause, as it was known, was particularly controversial and was perceived as a national humiliation. The so-called war guilt clause was not only morally questionable, but also carried with it significant financial implications. It laid the groundwork for the reparations that Germany would be required to pay, further straining an already devastated economy. Germany was saddled with crippling war reparations, payments intended to compensate the Allies for the costs of the war. These reparations placed an enormous burden on the German economy, leading to hyperinflation and widespread economic hardship throughout the 1920s. Beyond the financial burden, the treaty also imposed significant territorial losses on Germany. These territorial adjustments were seen as further evidence of the treaty's punitive nature. Alsace-Lorraine, a region with a mixed German and French population, was returned to France. This loss was particularly painful for many Germans, as the region had been a point of national pride. Germany's overseas colonies, once a source of pride and economic opportunity, were stripped away and divided amongst the victors. This loss further diminished Germany's standing on the global stage. These territorial losses were seen by many Germans as a national humiliation, a stain on their national honor. The sense of betrayal and injustice was palpable. The Treaty of Versailles, while intended to prevent future wars, ultimately sowed the seeds of resentment and instability that would contribute to the outbreak of World War II. The harsh terms and the sense of injustice it fostered created fertile ground for extremist ideologies to take root. The treaty's harsh terms, particularly the war guilt clause and the crippling reparations, created a deep sense of injustice among many Germans. This sense of injustice was not limited to the political elite but permeated all levels of German society. This resentment was skillfully exploited by extremist groups like the Nazis, who used it to fuel their rise to power. They promised to restore Germany's lost honor and to overturn the humiliating terms of the Treaty of Versailles, a message that resonated deeply with a population in despair. In the ashes of the German Empire, a new political order emerged, the Weimar Republic. This fledgling democracy was born out of the chaos and devastation of World War I, a time when Germany was grappling with defeat and the collapse of its imperial structure. Born in the midst of defeat and revolution, the Weimar Republic was Germany's first attempt at democracy. It was a bold experiment, an effort to bring democratic governance to a nation that had known only monarchy and autocracy. However, from its inception, the Republic was plagued by challenges that threatened to tear it apart. The political landscape was fraught with tension, and the new government faced opposition from both the far left and the far right. The Weimar Republic faced an uphill battle from the start. It was a government trying to establish itself in a nation that was deeply divided and struggling to recover from the horrors of war. It inherited a country devastated by war, burdened by debt, and deeply divided along political lines. The Treaty of Versailles had imposed harsh reparations on Germany, exacerbating the economic difficulties and fueling national resentment. The political landscape was fragmented, with a multitude of parties vying for power. This fragmentation made it nearly impossible to form a stable government, as coalitions were often fragile and short-lived. This made it difficult to form stable governments, leading to a sense of political paralysis and instability. The frequent changes in government further eroded public confidence in the democratic process. The young republic was also confronted with economic turmoil. The post-war economy was in shambles, and the government struggled to stabilize the currency and control inflation. Hyperinflation in the early 1920s wiped out the savings of the middle class, leaving many Germans in financial ruin. The value of the German mark plummeted, and people found themselves needing wheelbarrows of money just to buy basic necessities. The Great Depression, which began in 1929, exacerbated these problems, leading to mass unemployment and widespread poverty. The economic collapse further destabilized the already fragile political situation. The economic misery of the 1920s and 1930s created a climate of fear and desperation, making people more susceptible to extremist ideologies. Many Germans began to lose faith in the democratic process, turning instead to radical solutions. The Weimar Republic, weakened by internal divisions and external pressures, struggled to maintain order. The government was often seen as ineffective and unable to address the pressing issues of the day. Political violence, often fueled by extremist groups on both the left and the right, became increasingly common. These groups sought to undermine the Republic and promote their own radical agendas. Street battles between communists and right-wing paramilitaries became a regular occurrence, further undermining the authority of the state. The violence and chaos made it difficult for the government to assert control and maintain public order. The Weimar Republic, despite its democratic ideals, proved unable to provide the stability and security that many Germans craved. The constant turmoil and lack of effective governance left the population disillusioned and yearning for a more decisive leadership.